We're only days away from a United States Supreme Court ruling on former President Trump's presidential immunity case. Their decision has the potential to significantly impact the separation of powers and the country as a whole. Well, here to provide us with a better understanding of the situation is Dr. Caleb Smith. He's the director of the Center for Political Studies at Cedarville University. Okay, Dr. Smith, we're heading for a constitutional crisis or what? Justice Gorsuch says the court's writing a rule for the ages, and Brett Kavanaugh said the case has huge implications for the future of the presidency and the country. So regardless of the position that the court takes on this, what do you see as the potential consequences? Our country's never faced this before.
Yeah, it's regardless of what the court does here, the decision that they hand down is going to have a significant effect on executive power moving forward. They're making a decision about how the executive relates to itself, whether or not they can be prosecuted by the Department of Justice. They're also considering other contexts in which criminal charges could be brought against the president. And, you start to think through what the implications of this could be for future presidents, whether it's Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden or any president in the future that'll be brought under legal scrutiny. And so, to some degree, this is not just about Donald Trump. This is really about the office of the presidency within our constitutional structure.
It may come down then to official acts as president and unofficial acts as a private citizen or presidential candidate. So how do we decide? Who decides what is official and what isn't?
So the clearest place to go to decide what's an official act and what's not would be the Constitution itself. Now, it's not going to be an exhaustive list, but when we're seeing the president execute powers that are listed there in Article 2, so for example, something like the commander-in-chief power or the power of appointment, those are presidential powers that are recognized and that are authorized by the Constitution. And it's difficult for me to imagine that the president can be criminally charged simply for exercising those kinds of powers. At the same time, it is also easy to imagine how a president could use his or her commander-in-chief power in such a way that would be criminal.
Well, let's get a little deeper then. Some of those opposed to absolute presidential immunity say a president could order the murder of his opponent or throw him in jail, and there wouldn't be consequences for that. And Trump points out there's already a process in place for the Congress to take action, impeachment, trial. So if a president has absolute immunity, could he still be held accountable through impeachment, any other process?
They could be held politically accountable, for sure. Congress has the ability to impeach and remove the president for abusing his powers or for engaging in other kinds of conduct. And then the Constitution certainly more than implies that a criminal prosecution could take place for impeachable kinds of offenses.
Does the Congress have the authority to throw him in prison?
No, they do not. They have the ability to, well, I shouldn't say fully they do not. They can hold certain people in contempt. They can, they can engage in criminal proceedings based on contempt charges in front of Congress, but they're really limited in what they can do in that context. They can file someone, and they can recommend that Department of Justice pursue criminal charges for someone, but Congress doesn't have the ability to engage in a full-blown judicial proceeding. Politically, they can do a lot. Judicially, they can do very, very little.
And impeachment is a political process.
It is, no question. It's a political process that can have legal consequences, but it isn't inherently a legal proceeding.
Well, if former President Trump is not given immunity, then wouldn't there be consequences for other presidents? You touched on this. Obama could put on trial for the Fast and Furious gun smuggling operation. Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was killed in that operation. Also, the assassination of Osama bin Laden. Bill Clinton could be charged criminally for ordering the bombing of that pharmaceutical factory in Sudan. George W. Bush for weapons of mass destruction and the execution of Saddam Hussein. So your thoughts, more thoughts on presidential consequences?
Yeah, I think we all recognize the potential for abuse here. And so if there is no legal protection whatsoever for a president, and they could legitimately be brought up on criminal charges for anything they did as president of the United States, I think we all recognize how much that could hamper the office of the presidency. I think no one on the court seemed interested in saying that there's no immunity whatsoever or no protections for being president of the United States. I think everyone recognized that there has to be some sort of legal protection in place for the president when he or she carries out their legal obligations under the Constitution. Where this gets to be really difficult, though, is in your very first question, is how do we distinguish between what is a legal action under the Constitution versus what is an illegal action, or as you said, a public act versus a private act. That's where it's going to be more difficult to make these distinctions. But with President Obama or President Clinton or President Bush exercising their powers as commander-in-chief, it's, none of those things really come close to what we're talking about with Mr. Trump. This is a legitimate use of presidential action under authorized powers of the Constitution. It's difficult to imagine any federal court would think that that could move forward in a criminal context. But when we talk about arguably public acts, that's when this gets to be much harder.
Well, after hearing comments then from some of the justices during arguments, most legal scholars suggest that the court may likely make a narrow ruling, as you suggest. So what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I think my guess is this will be a unanimous decision by the court, and they're going to find that there is no blanket presidential immunity for sure. I don't think anyone is interested in that. But they are going to argue the president does deserve some legal protections based on authorized powers under Article 2. But again, I also don't think they're going to say the president is immune as long as the president's using authorized powers under Article 2. As I said before, you could use your powers commander-in-chief, but to do something horrifically criminal. And this isn't all that different than what we see even in the context of the military itself. Members of the military can use their force as members of the military, but in a way that violates the norms of the military, in a way that they can be prosecuted. And so, in that sense, the president would have the same kind of legal jeopardy as a military officer would have. You have certain proper functions, you have the rules that are in place under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Once you step outside of those, well, then you can be held responsible. I think the president's going to end up in a similar place.
Okay, so it looks like these trials will move forward then. Okay, Dr. Caleb Smith of Cedarville University, thank you for providing those insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you.